Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome in this event in the framework of the Creative Europe project, AURA, which stands for Auralisation of Acoustic Heritage Sites using augmented and virtual reality. My name is Christine Sauter, and I'm a project manager with the Berlin International Cooperation Agency, BGZ, who is, amongst others, coordinating this project, AURA. My team colleague Anne Eiselein from the Konzerthaus Berlin will be introducing you to this project in a while. And this project, which is just as the many admirable projects and initiatives we are going to hear about later, is striving to introduce the cultural sector, and in our case, in particular, the classic music performance and theater sector, into the exciting world of immersive technologies and the many opportunities that they open up for the sector. In this, we endeavor to contribute to the European Commission's ambition to unlock novel creative potentials and pave the way for compelling interactions with young and new audiences. And I leave you for this event in the hands of our wonderful moderator, Janina Rink, who is also a development manager for the Mahler Chamber Orchestra. So I hope you will enjoy this event. Thank you, Janina, for taking over.
Thank you very much, Christine. I'm very happy to be part of this event, and I look forward to guiding us through our 6 keynotes and the following debate in the course of the next roughly 3 hours. There's a slight change of schedule as, unfortunately, Antoine Petrov had to cancel his keynote due to illness. We hope he gets better very quickly. But let's dive right in. As our first speaker today, I would like to welcome Anne Eiselein. She worked as a producer of documentaries for public television and cinema before she joined the Communications and Digital Mediation Department at Konzerthaus Berlin last year at the height of the pandemic. And at the Konzerthaus Berlin, she is responsible primarily for digital and immersive projects, experimenting with new technologies such as virtual and augmented reality for music education. So, for example, the Konzerthaus Berlin created the world's first quartet in augmented reality, as well as the project Umwelten or Environments, which is an interactive composition with new music in virtual reality and augmented reality. Anna is, as Christine mentioned, also involved in the project Aura. She's the Konzerthaus Berlin project lead. And this leads us to our first keynote. Anna will now give you insight into Aura and the rich potential of auralisation technique for the music sector. The floor is yours, Anna.
Thank you, Janina. Welcome to my talk on the project Aura, and I'm happy to see some familiar names here. In my presentation, I will introduce the project and discuss the opportunities and challenges for us as an institution of culture. Our project Aura, which ends at the end of the year, focuses on auralisation. Auralisation is the complete modeling of an acoustic space based on geometry and material properties of reality. The sound of a real space can thus be produced. The sound of a real space can thus be reproduced virtually. This includes properties like sound reflected and absorbed by objects in the room, but of course also spatial sound. For example, how the sound changes depending on the position of the room and the head position of the user. Aura is a Creative Europe project with several international partners from Italy, Ukraine, and Germany, each with a technical or cultural background. In the project, we digitalized and auralized 3 musical heritage venues: the Konzerthaus Berlin, the Teatro del Maggio in Florence, and the Opera House in Lviv, in order to be able to carry out case studies based on the auralized models. What exactly does auralisation mean? You see here the definition is auralisation is a procedure designed to model and simulate the experience of acoustic phenomena rendered as a sound file in a virtualized space. Oops, sorry. In each of the three models, the same pieces of music is heard in order to have the possibility to experience the same piece of music in different halls. In order to be able to implement the sound correctly in the virtual environment, first a piece of music had to be recorded which has no noise or echo. A part of Claude Debussy's Children's Corner was recorded by musicians as 18 individual voices in an anechoic chamber at the Technical University in Berlin. These recordings were not easy for the orchestra members because they had to play individually and without their colleagues. In addition, our project partners from Florence scanned the interior and exterior of the Konzerthaus Berlin on 5 days with a laser scanner, as well as the 2 other houses in Florence and Lviv. We also created avatars of the orchestra members. And then we brought it all together in a simple VR experience. I have included a short clip here as a video in which you can hear the differences at various positions. Could you please show the video? Well, that was a short impression of the experience. I will now talk bits about the opportunities and challenges of such a project for us as an institution of culture. We have developed several use cases for this project. For example, marketing, in addition to being able to choose tickets by site, it's possible on our website now. It would be nice also being able to choose seats by acoustic aspects. We get many requests from all over the world to rent the concert hall for outside events. This rental is also an economic factor for us. Everything that can be clarified in advance in terms of planning and preparation has real added value for us. That would the second use case. This possibility of experiencing the concert hall virtually as if you were there, it's also a future scenario that concerns us, not least because of the current much discussed metaverse by Mark Zuckerberg, but also if a house had to be closed for a very long time due to renovation measures or for pandemic reasons, or at the very moment the opera house in Lviv is unfortunately not accessible for many people right now, but it would still be possible to visit it virtually. On the other hand, for people with limited mobility, for example, in retirement homes. The last point, the education approach. Auralisation makes it possible to hear the orchestra from completely different perspectives, and thus classical music can also be brought closer to a young target group in a playful way. What we realized during the auralisation, acoustics is complicated. First of all, the architecture, for example, the geometric space, the objects in the room and the materials used influence acoustics. But there are also many other factors that influence the sound. For example, the load of the hall, the changes in the room due to acoustic constructions and acoustic sails, which you can see here as glass on the boxes of the first level. And last but not least, of course, the musicians as a sound body with their instruments also influence the sound. Mapping this complicated soundscape is very complex and difficult to reproduce in the simplified models we used for auralisation in this project. A result of this project, auralisation has potential in the future, especially for technology continues to develop. We are relatively close to the added value of being able to show the halls everywhere in the world and give an impression of what is possible with our spaces. For everything concretely related to the symphony orchestra experience, we will still have to wait for technical developments. For example, it is simply too costly and also not very good to record an entire symphony orchestra from individual voices because dynamics and excellence are simply lost. Soon, however, there will certainly be ways to filter the individual voices from a recording in such a way that we can use them for our own purpose, for example, for ticket sales and the virtual concert. Another factor, the future spread of technologies such as AR and VR, that was sometimes difficult in the evaluation to develop future scenarios that the experts involved could imagine as everyday life. In addition, the experience also needs to become more realistic with rigged models or volumetric videos of musicians and audience. Furthermore, even with interaction possibilities with the other visitors. As a Konzerthaus Berlin, we are excited about what we will possible in the future. And finally, we now have very detailed 3D data that we can use in many different ways. Yeah, the reference, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna Eiselein, for sharing Aura with us. Our second speaker is Anastina Hapasari, a specialist working at the crossroads of art and technology. Currently, Anastina is leading a project by the Finnish National Opera and Ballet called Opera Beyond, a project which explores the possibilities of new technologies for the performing arts, and which is also crucial for developing a digital strategy for the entire organization. Accordingly, in her keynote, Anastina will give examples of how technologies can ultimately enhance the meaning and the value of the performing arts. A very warm welcome to Anastina Hapasari.
Thank you so much, Janina. And yeah, nice to meet you all. Very happy to be here. Thank you, the Aura team, for inviting me. I will put up my presentation now. As Janina mentioned, I indeed work as the project manager and creative strategist at the Finnish National Opera and Ballet. And this is our Opera Beyond project that I am going to present. The Finnish National Opera and Ballet is located in Helsinki, in Finland. It's quite a large opera and ballet company, also somewhat a traditional one. We do a varied program of from like 18th century classics to contemporary pieces. And there are around 25 different main stage productions annually and 550 employees from over 30 nationalities. The Opera Beyond project that we started in 2018 within the organization aims to explore the possibilities of new technology for performing arts. So with this project, we want to see where opera and ballet, but also the other forms of performing arts. I think there's a lot of cross-genre and mixing of genres and art forms in this field, but where these art forms can go if they're taken to the next level and their boundaries are and their limits are pushed with new and immersive technology and other types of new technology. And side by side, I think it goes hand in hand. There are definitely the other trends and developments that we need to take into consideration. Social and societal change, cultural phenomena, changes in audience behavior, and so on. And those are something that we're also looking to tackle in this project. But maybe first and foremost, where we see the biggest benefit in immersive technology is that through it, we can reach new audiences. And then besides the artistic content and our performances and different types of installations, we also focus on workflows and how we can make our workflows and production models more efficient with new technologies. So now I will share some examples of our work, showing those both sides and illustrating what we have so far done with this project. So first, I would like to share a little video clip of our Lila installation. It's an immersive installation that premiered in 2020 at our house in Helsinki.
Rip it down.
Hi, Lila gives her voice to you. You are now ready to step in.
We create a universe within which things can happen uniquely to you, depending on what you say, depending on how you move within the space, depending on how you interact with other visitors.
If you should actually rebuild opera, you can't rip it down more than we've done it.
Okay, so what you saw here is called Lila. It's an immersive installation by composer, conductor Esa-Pekka Salonen, dramaturge Paula Vesala, sound designer Tuomas Norvio, and concept designer team Echo Collective, as well as our own in-house designer and technical team. Lila rejects the roles of the traditional roles in performing arts, as its music and its visuals evolve and change in interaction with the audience. To speak in concrete terms, maybe you saw from the video, Lila is a dome-shaped structure inside which the people are surrounded by this multi-sensory universe created with projection mapping, with a spatial sound system that includes nearly 50 speakers all over the dome, as well as these personal speakers that people have with them during the entire performance. It has motion tracking technology, which enables the interaction, and it has sort of an AI or algorithms that make the experience different every time that someone experiences it. So every audience member, in a way, leaves their mark in the installation, and it evolves then over time. It only welcomes 6 people at a time. So that's sort of a traditional limitation with this sort of location-based art installations. Also, right now, we have on our program, we're running a main stage production called Cirque Opera 2.0 that combines circus and classical music into this spectacular show. And in addition to mixing these art forms, we also elevated the show with new elements. There is a completely new virtual performer in the show. It's a modern diva that's made with motion and facial capture and appears on stage with the other performers. And we also have these projections that react to the performer's movements with sensors recognizing the movements, and then the visuals in some ways magnifying the movements of the circus acts. And then a third example that I'd like to share is something that has to do more with behind the scenes and the workflows required to build our traditional performances. So I will show a little brand new video clip of that as well.
Our vision was to create a virtual platform on which we could visualize large-scale stage productions. On the XR stage, we have an identical digital twin for the Finnish National Opera and Ballet's main stage and auditorium. It provides a comprehensive tool for illustrating sets, designing lights and projections, operating machinery, and blocking scenes.
With the XR stage, we can facilitate communication, enhance efficiency, and enjoy unlimited stage time. And through this, we can improve our artistic quality, which makes me very happy.
The platform runs on Game Engine. It can be used with virtual reality headsets, but also on desktop computers and with mobile devices, and even integrated with lighting consoles. Instead of a scale model, why not to have a photorealistic one-to-one model of the set, where you can actually look and walk around. You can literally access the stage anytime, from anywhere. In addition to improving efficiency of our work, we can also create a positive ecological impact by reducing the need for travel.
And really, to think of it, this is just the beginning. The artistic possibilities are endless.
So you also saw there a glimpse of our Cirque Opera production, but generally what we've put together here is a photorealistic 3D model of our main stage, and we've added on it functionalities that allow for actual designing, making sets and light changes, all in high detail and in real time. So it is basically a digital twin of our main stage that can effectively be used for pre-visualization and stage design workflows, even remotely. And also it allows us indeed to have endless stage time. And that's something that we would otherwise, the stage time would otherwise be very limited. As you perhaps know from performing arts organizations this big, the productions are very heavy and require the workload of a tremendous amount of people every time you want to use the stage. This model that we've named the XR stage can now be viewed on a platform that can be visited in virtual reality with VR goggles or glasses, but also without, on desktops or on mobile devices if wanted. We are currently using it with various headsets. Also, I think the possibilities in the future, I think in the previous presentation, this sort of acoustic simulation was mentioned, and I think that could be also an interesting and ambitious next step is to add the acoustic model in the visual platform and model. And yes, so I think this is also, like Lily said in the video, this is just the beginning. I think in addition to our workflows, we can of course even use this 3D model as a base for our metaverse presence or many other content types. I think to say now to finish with, I think as a traditional performing arts institution, from the even perhaps more traditional end of the spectrum, I think the project has for us meant quite a big leap into the unknown, and so it has maybe not also quite always been so straightforward of a process, and it has actually required a lot of trial and error in the process. So I think I will be very happy to share those learnings with you further later on in the panel, and also feel free to reach out to me by email, and if you have anything to ask further or any ideas on what we could do together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna-Stina Haapasaari, for sharing so many different ways in which the Finnish National Opera and Ballet is making use of digital technologies. I look forward to looking further into that in the panel discussion. Our next keynote is given by two speakers, Franziska Ritter and Pablo Dornhege. Franziska Ritter is a scenographer, musician, and educator working at the intersection of art, culture, and theatre. After studying architecture and film and photography in Berlin and London, she co-founded the master's program dealing with dramaturgical design of space at the Technical University Berlin, where she also works as an assistant professor. She teaches and researches scenography, theatre, architecture, and technology at various international universities. And she's also in charge of the German Research Foundation project, digitalization of the collection of theatre architecture at the Architecture Museum of Technical University Berlin. At the moment, she's doing her PhD researching the visual image of theatre architecture. And besides that, Franziska is initiator and artistic director of the one-on-one concerts, and she leads a chamber music festival in Germany. In 2019, Franziska and Pablo Dornhege founded digital.dthg, which is a digital competence center of the German Theatre Technological Association, which in turn is part of OISTAT, the International Organization of Scenographers, Theatre Architects and Technicians. And in their research project called Immaterial Theatre Spaces, they are investigating the potential of virtual and augmented reality for theatre. Pablo Dornhege researches, develops, and designs real and virtual narrative spaces. This year, he was appointed Professor of Transmedia Design at the Berlin University of Applied Sciences. He has been a visiting professor at the Berlin University of the Arts, and he taught and conducted research at other international universities as well. In addition to his teaching and research activities, he's an editor for the knowledge platform Nachtkritik Plus and a commissioner for digitality at the German Theatre Technological Association. Franziska and Pablo will now present their project Spatial Encounters, an artistic project experimenting with how virtual reality can create a hybrid real stage environment, which artists and audiences meet and become both actors and designers of a jointly created experience. Franziska and Pablo, we are ready when you are.
Thanks a lot, Janina, for introduction and invitation. I guess the screen is shared?
Yeah.
Yes. So welcome to our presentation of Spatial Encounters, and as you said already, it's about hybrid real creative spaces, and it's part of the project Immaterial Theatre Spaces. So we are speaking on behalf of a team of 6 people, and the research project ran for the last 3 years, and the Deutsche Theatertechnische Gesellschaft was hosting it, financed by the Commissioner of Culture and Media of the federal government. So due to that research project, we founded a competence center because we thought it's really important that projects not come and go, but the knowledge is really saved and given like more than just until the end of the project. So it's saved in that competence center, and we are platform and dialogue partner for the future. So what did we do? We brought together theater and immersive technology, and that means augmented and virtual reality. But as you all know, it's getting more and more into just mixed realities. So this division between AR and VR, which is great, just disappears. And theater also is not just theater as an institution. We also cooperated with universities teaching theater technologies or archives or like the free scene. And we researched, developed, and transferred prototypes. So it's about solutions which could live after that. So it's ideas, it's knowledge which we transfer into the public. And as you could see here on the next slide, we focused on architecture, technology, and stage design due to that the Deutsche Theatertechnische Gesellschaft is more focusing on the backstage part of theater. But theater is, of course, a conglomeration of more than just that. So we focused on those three parts and also looked at the technologies in terms of how they can have potentials for theater as a tool. So we developed teaching tools or tools for technicians to improve the everyday life of a technician behind stage. Or technology also could serve as a communication in exhibitions, in meetings, in like for the virtual Bauprobe, for example, and also as an experience. So as we did, for example, as you can see on the right side, for the Große Schauspielhaus, we developed a virtual reconstruction of that architecture for audience at Friedrichstadtpalast. So there's a whole range of projects we did in those 3 years. And today we would like to focus on one project, the Spatial Encounters, which we thought it's important to focus on the part of the contact between musicians and audience. And we'd like to use the quote by Pierre Boulez, where he points out that a concert space should essentially be a space of communication, as animated contact between active participants, be they listeners or creators. So that was like the base for our work, to really look into that resonating space between musicians and audience, and how and the new technologies can deal with that, or how we can bring musicians and audience together using those new potentials of the technologies.
So another question in that regard was also, of course, as Franziska said, bringing those two elements together, audience and musicians and artists. But the other thing was, can we also activate the audience in that means? And using this technology, bring the audience, move it from a more passive position into an active part of what we are doing there on stage. And that brought us to the element of co-creation, where we said, okay, it's no longer, maybe technology can be used in this context to bring this experience into another level and create a moment of working together and having audience and artists doing something meaningful that is a whole experience for everyone, and a new experience for everyone. So we did some experiments, a lot of experiments. This might be a bit much right now with 2 videos playing, but I think it was a bit also what was playing around in our heads. So we tested how can the artist move the participant or the audience through an audience. Then we checked, okay, this might not work in every case with every instrument. And we also said, okay, what happens when the musician is in the VR and we do something around him, we paint something in space, we used simple tools in that, like tilt brush, for example, but also what happens if we're in the same space. And from all these ideas and testings, we created a tool that we're going to show later. And yeah, so that was the kind of a part of the process of how we came to what we were doing in the end.
So the musician you can see in those testing videos is David Wedel, from the concertmaster from the Gewandhaus in Leipzig. and he is one of the musicians of an ensemble where we used to work like since 10 years in a chamber music festival in Thuringia on the Kloster Volkenroda, so the Cloister Volkenroda, which is a great space for the arts. And every summer we have a festival there. So there's a space where we decided to test and provide that project. And here just some images of that space. And on the next slide, you can see don't know the word for Scheune. So this is
I had the same problem the last time I was talking about this. I thought I wanted to look it up, but I forgot.
So it's
but the shed. Let's call it the shed.
The barn. It's a barn. And as you can see, it's a special place with animals, and that was the space for our project. So we turned.
It was interesting, like a little anecdote about that. So we saw in the pictures before that this monastery has perfect, wonderful spaces and architectural interesting spaces, but we needed really space. So we needed 150 square meters at least. So we were looking around there, and this was a bit off. But the funny thing that was people were walking towards us and walking towards digitality, finding us and finding the experience. And so it was a bit off the main festival, but it had its own special feeling that we could have there. And as I said, we needed some space. This is what happens when you plan something like this during Corona using Miro. So what we can see here is we had a stage area of about 150 square meters. We had a little area where the technology was standing, part for the musician, and of course the biggest area was for the audience itself.
So this is how we turned the space into a really magical experience. And there's one thing which is important to point out is the connection between three parties. So it's the musician, it's the audience, and it's the VJ responsible for the virtual scene. So we have a co-creation moment of three different parties, and of course the audience, as you've seen on the slide before, is up 6 to 9 persons using VR goggles.
So the element that comes always back in this project is the element of the triangle. So what we created here, as Franziska said, is a co-creative triangle. So we have the audience as one entity, is one part of the triangle. Our musician, in this part, one person, is a triangle. And the scenography, the virtual scenography controlled by our VJ is also one part of this co-creative triangle. And as we can see in this graphic is here also that the audience itself always was part of and working in kind of triangles. So always three people were part of one object or one visual element. So this is more of a collage of this is nothing someone could really see at one time, because what we have here in this collage is, for one part, of course, some part of the reality. We see Lea Laser here, Lea Schorling, as our VJ, who was you can see it here on the screen. She was controlling the scenography. She could introduce fog into it. She could switch between different scenes, for example, and she had some toolkits to work on that. And what we can also see here is what the people inside the VR see. So they see this kind of futuristic, at this point, of digital landscape, and they see themselves not as people anymore, not as human people, but as these avatars in form of cones shaped of circles. And what we can see here between them is a big sculpture that rises up into the sky, and this is part of what they do. They create, through their positions in space, they create this superstructure, this dynamic sculpture, and this in turn can again be seen by the artist, by the musician, who then reacts. So we have in this co-creative triangle, we have this different elements that work together, and having for one part creating the sculpture, creating and controlling the landscape and the music, and these three always react onto each other, and in a live setting, it's not preset in a way. There's no choreography in this meaning.
Right? So I think, Pablo, this is important to point out before we go into the trailer or the video of that performance. It's like every performance was different, lasting for about 20 minutes, and there was no dramaturgy of onboarding and offboarding, and it depends on the audience and the musician and the VJ what happens. So we had different performances in the morning or at night, or so that was really interesting to watch and to see and to analyze how different that could be.
Yeah.
So it's really a live situation.
It is, as you said, it was really interesting to see the different aspects that change also what the performance looked like. So in the morning was different, in the evening was different because of, people were kind of a bit more lazy or had like this morning calm maybe, and at night they already might have a drink or two, and so they were much more flexible. And also it was interesting if the audience already knew each other. So if it's 6 people that know each other, work together, or if it's complete or family or complete strangers, it was really different. And it was interesting because we also had the audio lines, we recorded most of them, and we had the video grabbing of everything. So we could also see just by the music, we couldn't understand, okay, this is a morning piece and this is an evening piece. And it was not pre-planned. It was just the way the people interacted with each other. But so maybe it's right now the point point in time to show the trailer and to have a look at what this looked like. Wonderful. It's streaming. I will just try again. Maybe it works.
No, it works. There should be sound.
You can hear it, right?
Pablo, can you share the sound again? Is that possible?
Oh, that is not good. There was no sound. Yeah, now?
I can't hear. You need
it
to...
was selected when we show. I'm going to stop the screen share for a second. And because I had the sound on. Let's check again. This is just going to be a second. So, can you see it now?
Weird. Thanks.
Cool.
Right, so maybe now just give some little aspects on the virtual scenery, as you probably want to know how this interactive space functions. So first of all, Pablo, you already talked about the avatar, the bodies of the users. And as you can see, it's maybe inspired by Oskar Schlemmer. We look for something really simple, but because you could imagine like it's a live rendering, it needs to be quite simple. And due to COVID, we also thought about the safety distance. So it's 1.50 meters. What we thought of that they keep away from each other, but what they did is they were really trying to merge each other. So that was really funny that they bring together those dresses. So interesting how audience react different than we thought.
As you said, it was a live rendering, but an additional to that is what we used as an interface. We did not use, as we would normally do, a game engine in the background, but it's all a web XR application. So that was one of the main reasons why we had to keep it very low on the visual fidelity, so to say. So we were working really with simpler forms, and instead of renderings or objects that had to be rendered complexly in real time, because as you can see here, we were using mobile VR headsets and broadcasting everything through a server and a WebSocket. And so that was one of the limitations, but it was really cool because we could make changes on our website up until to the last minutes, and then it was just broadcasted through the server. We didn't have to install applications. So that from a technical side was very interesting. Here with the costumes, and an interesting part was when we thought about, okay, what can go wrong? What happens when the people don't move? So we asked ourselves, how can we activate the movement of the people? So what we did here, when you see, okay, now we're having two people standing there, but once you moved, the lower circle would trail back or would fade after one. So if one were to move through space quickly, the lowest circle would stay a bit behind. So it was always like a gown, like a wedding dress or something that really was swinging around oneself. So this already activated people, even standing, to move around and then start walking around and meeting each other. So that was a very integral part of this activation of the audience.
Mm-hmm. And the second thing is that we were able to change the colors. So if people went down to the floor, the colors moved into white. So and as well, like jumping would cause another effect on the virtual scenery. So we had different possibilities of interaction here, and we were surprised how people really were playful on the floor and tried that out and managed to experience all our little details we had in the project.
Yeah. So just to have a small visual of our dynamic sculpture, as you can see here, we were following the idea of the triangles and how three people or a group of people can create something bigger and be formed into one sculpture. So this is one of those ideas that came out of there, and it worked pretty well. So also the musician had some control over the speed of how this sculpture was rising into the sky. So he had a little paddle, and he could also do some action that he could do in that regard. So this is how those different landscapes looked like that we presented. So we had some more technical, some more realistic or nature inspired or inspired by the surrounding Thuringian landscape, but also some that were really focused on dramatism and dramatic spaces like the Sunder space or, so very dense atmospheric spaces was the idea.
And it's really, that are just examples we produced for that performances, but it could be different, could be other landscapes. We worked with scenography students of the Technical University, for example, to develop further sceneries. So it's really meant to be a framework where other peoples could now take it and work on it. So those landscapes or virtual sceneries we developed together with our musician and he was really much into dramatic scenery and had some wishes. And on the same time, we wanted to surprise him because it is like a live situation and it's about improvisation. So that is really important, not to pre-produce too much. So it's really, we decided it on spot, on the mood of the audience and on the mood of the musician, what we gave in as a signal to the crowd. And here are some reactions of our audience or even on the ensemble to point out what they experienced. Really this active listening by moving invites us to listen differently, and this was exactly what we wanted to achieve. So we were quite happy that really functions and made people think different, hear different, and feel different about music because they were part of it. And another aspect is really whether young or old, the magic was the same for everyone. And that was really nice to see. It doesn't matter if you are a child or elderly people. All of them had a lot of fun. And as you've seen maybe on that slide about the avatar, I had the feeling because of all those being the same size, being the same height, it was kind of a really democratic space where you don't have to think about your size or how you look like or what dress you wear. So we kind of created a neutral space where they could feel safe, and that made them really to move a lot, which they maybe wouldn't do without the VR goggles. So that was really an important point. What did we learn, Pablo?
So yeah, in comparison to how we normally would work, this dialogical process with our coders, with the musicians, brought us to a very interesting iterative development. We had all these testings, came back, checked out, had some ideas how it could be visually. Then we talked with the musician who said something, and we had to work and rework all the time in a very interesting way, in an interesting process where we had to find our own language and how we are going to communicate with each other about those different elements. I'm not going into all those things that are listed here, but so one thing was, as we said before, the simplicity versus complexity. We knew we wanted to make something that will create a powerful experience, and that had to come with some complexity. But then at one point we realized that the complexity can come from a very simple setup, or from a reduced setup of our framework of rules of what we're doing and what we can do. And the complexity comes by itself. The experiential complexity comes by itself. And also very important was for us the use of the physical space itself. As you saw on some of those pictures, that we had a scenographic introduction into the space. It's not just a barn. It's always a bit more. So we have to bring the people in and show them that this is a cultural experience and not just a game or something like that. Yeah. Do you have something to add from the learnings that you find important?
Fine. So what's next? Our research project is finished, unfortunately, but all those prototypes are open source, open data, so you could download them on our website. I don't know, maybe we give it into the chat. So feel free to take it, to use it, or to contact us to develop it further. So I think it needs new research project, maybe on that project, because we think there's so many things to explore. That was just the beginning. It's a prototype, so of course you could uplift it thinking in terms of scale, also expand the hybridity. So meaning, like in our case, we decided the musician not being in the VR, but he watched it on the screen, but he technically it's no problem to bring him into the VR. So that was something due to time issues we couldn't develop, but I think that would be the next step, definitely, to really build this hybrid real spaces together with the musician, and to also expand the musical part of it. So working with an ensemble, maybe just having one instrument for one audience member, so that you really have a real connection between them, because it was at the moment was really quite difficult to get all the signals for one musician when it is more than 6 or 7 people on stage. So how would it be to work with an orchestra, for example? Yeah. Pablo?
Yeah, also maybe at this time we thought it was very important to have it all in this local experience, but it might be, I mean, technically it's possible without too much problems to bring in people from far away during using the web connection. There could be people there, or the musicians could be from far away, or so any part of there could be controlled during the web, using the web from some other place, for example. That could also bring in a new aspect into this co-creative system.
So yeah, and of course we could think not only about music or musical spaces. We would like to work with puppetry or actors, for example. You could also do it as a space for literature or for dancers, maybe, work with choreographers. Then the role of the audience would maybe something totally different. At the moment, we don't have any audience beside the audience on stage, which was really important. But of course, you could think of it more like a dance performance. So what is different then? So that are all questions which need to be explored in the future. So we would like to thank. Yeah, feel free to contact us to develop that project further. And
yeah, I think that's it. We are a bit over time, I guess, but yeah, I hope it wasn't. I hope it was interesting enough to listen to.
Thank you very much to both of you, Franziska Ritter and Pablo Dornheger. I think we're perfectly on time, so thank you. Okay, cool. Catching up, basically. And thank you for giving us insight into your project, Spatial Encounters. We will definitely come back to the concepts of participation and co-creation in the panel discussion at the end, I think. Look forward to that. Thanks. Our last speaker before the break was supposed to be Antoine Petrov. Unfortunately, he had to cancel his keynote due to illness. Therefore, we will jump directly to Brian Katz. Thank you for being so flexible. He is Research Director at the French National Center for Scientific Research, or CNRS, at the Sorbonne University, at the Institute Jean-Laurent d'Alembert in the group Luthiery's Acoustic Music. His fields of interest include spatial 3D, audio rendering and perception, room acoustics, HCI, and virtual reality. With a background in physics, philosophy, PhD in acoustics, and a high degree research in engineering sciences, Brian worked for various acoustic research laboratories and acoustic consulting firms before he joined CNRS. With Brian's keynote, we will venture towards the field of archaeology, so to speak. He will give us insight into a very special project where a team of researchers and sound engineers created a virtual reconstruction of a concert that took place at the Notre Dame in Paris in 2013. He will tell you more about it now. Welcome, Brian Katz. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for the invitation and pushing me ahead. A little surprised, but I'm fine. So as I said, so I'm going to kind of give a bit of an overview of the kind of research that we're doing. And I think what makes it a bit different is that we're more interested in kind of, well, definitely in the acoustics of spaces and the recreation of acoustics of spaces. And we're getting into kind of how we can do performances and artistic productions that way. But the original focus is always on the acoustics. Janina already kind of gave a presentation of who I am, so I don't think I need to do that anymore. So in general, kind of we work with simulations of acoustics and modeling acoustics. This is kind of a technique that's been around for a while, mostly in the design phase of buildings. And the way that numerical simulations work is we can predict the propagation of sound. We can look at the impact of different materials, different volumes, different choices. And from that, we can get out the level of sounds as they propagate, where they come from, and all the different reflections that arrive at different users. And to build such a model, we need a geometrical definition of the space, but we also need knowledge of all the materials, the acoustic properties, even to a construction level. So it's not enough just to know that the wall is a plaster wall, but is it one layer of plaster or 3 layers of plaster? Is there an air gap behind it, or is it glued to concrete? So we need all of these kind of elements. And the best way to kind of do these kind of simulations is to have an acoustic measurement as a reference. If we want to experience that acoustics, this is kind of the different elements that we kind of look at. So we can have the dry anechoic room recordings, the way it was talked about by, I think, Anne in the first presentation. And that can be single musicians or individual musicians in a group with individual microphones. We have our computer model, our room acoustic model, where we can simulate the impulse response in the measurements. It goes through a convolution processor. And then if we want to have a virtual reality experience, then we need a graphical model, which we can then control in real time through different software. And then using head-mounted displays or other devices, we can control navigation and orientation in that kind of environment. But before going further, I think there's a couple of main questions, fundamental questions in using these acoustic simulations and auralizations. Is one, can we trust the acoustic fidelity of these simulations? So do I measure the same thing in the virtual environment that I do in the real environment? Can I trust the auditory fidelity? So as a subjective listener, do I hear the same thing in the two environments? And then if we go even farther, do we create a convincing immersive environment? So as a performer, do I react the same way in the virtual environment, or do I play the same way as I do in the real environment? But I think we're going to leave that for another day, because that doesn't really involve the study that I'm presenting today. So if we want to look at those questions, here some kind of case studies that we did. So we took a small kind of Italian style opera house that's in Paris, a small cathedral, and the large cathedral of Notre Dame. So each of these, we were able to create a model, calibrate the model using a kind of a defined methodology, and we can show that we are getting the same kind of sense of measurements for reverberation and clarity as we do in the model, as we do in real life. So that's kind of the variations between the two, and we can see that they match quite well. If we want to look at the auditory fidelity, then we can actually present these two examples to listeners and present either a measured acoustic condition or a simulated acoustic condition. And here we ask people for those three rooms to judge a number of acoustic parameters, so reverberance, clarity, sense of distance, tonal balance, coloration, plausibility, and then some spatial issues on apparent source width and kind of listener envelopment. And we see no real bias in our simulations between measurement and simulation. And to kind of give you an idea of one of the results, here's the recording of a concert that was at Notre Dame, recorded the conductor's position, and then I can follow that by the reconstruction of the same concert. So I'm going to hope that the audio works. Otherwise, I have to reset something. So first, so this is a recording over the head of the conductor's position. Okay, so if that didn't work, then I need to do the sharing a different way, because it was thought that it would work one way, but it didn't. So if I re-share my screen, sorry about that. I hate it when this happens. Share. So now the only problem is that I can't see the chat if I'm going to do this. So someone's going to have to jump in and tell me if it doesn't work. And then if we try and recreate the same experiment in virtual, we get this. So from this work, we'd worked on 2 production. One was a short fly-through of the cathedral in a real VR immersive production, and we did that in 2015. And then in 2020, we created this La Vierge 2020, and I'm going to kind of explain both of those quite quickly now. So the first is the Ghost Orchestra. So basically, this was initiated by an opportunity of a concert being performed in Notre Dame in 2013. And with our partners, the National Conservatory, they were actually recording this concert. And it's quite a large concert with a very large orchestra and multiple choirs. And we saw this as an interesting opportunity to kind of share this event for the 850th anniversary of the construction of Notre Dame with people who couldn't be there. So that was kind of the goal. And it was also a way to do a proof of concept for a virtual concert. It kind of coincided with the release of YouTube 360 and their integration of 3D audio. And the goal was to kind of show how the acoustics changes within the cathedral as a function of space. And that was kind of our scientific message that we wanted to communicate. So you can see here in the recording kind of the layout of all the recording and the musicians. So there were 45 proximity microphones for each section, in addition to 8 suspended ambient microphones, and then a 5.1 system over the conductor that we were using as a reference. And then we had to create our acoustical model, and that was based on laser scans and measurements inside that we used to kind of calibrate it. Acoustic materials were added into the model, and then the directivity properties of each kind of musical section were also included into our simulation. And then we launched our geometrical acoustical simulations. Due to the kind of computation time required with this, we had to predefine our little movement path, and there you can see it in yellow. And we defined 88 listening positions along this trajectory with a listening point about every 3 meters. And just to give you an idea of what this involved, so that was 3 weeks of computation time once we set it all up on our on our calculation cluster. So here's an example, an extract of the YouTube video. I won't play the whole 5 minutes, but it'll give you a kind of a part of the flyover. And the idea is that you're on a magic carpet going over the orchestra while they're playing. So this whole video is about 5 minutes, and it's in 360. So while you can't hear it now in stereo due to the limitation of the broadcasting, if you actually listen to it on a real viewer with headphones, you can turn around and the sound should adapt to your head orientation. Whoops. And then, so just to kind of highlight some of the things that the limitations that we found. So the hypothesis that these close mic recordings would be isolated enough to kind of use them in this kind of rendering had certain issues. So sometimes the microphone in the section next to would pick up certain instruments. And the result of that was kind of we lose the precision, spatial precision for the direct sound, and things became kind of spatially blurry. As we wanted to kind of have a musically coherent passage of these 5 minutes, it turned out that, and since we had to predefine our trajectory, we didn't get the full effect of all the musical instruments and their positions during our trajectory. So the idea that there were actually so many musicians playing didn't come across very well in this little abstract extract, I mean. And yeah, again, so the path wasn't well synchronized to the musical instruments. Other issues were the fact that since we're doing simulated positions every 3 meters, we also lacked some details, especially when you go behind columns, and we don't get that kind of masking effect for all the instruments. So that was back in 2015. So the next project we did was La Vierge 2020, really looking at a full-length concert performance. And kind of this was inspired by, first, we have the fire disaster at Notre Dame in 2019, which raised a lot of questions about the acoustic cultural heritage and what was preserved and what was known and documented about the acoustics of Notre Dame. And from that, we started 2 research projects. One is a European project on the past years with some European and Italian and English partners addressing the general question of acoustic cultural heritage, and then a French national project really focusing on the acoustics of Notre Dame and its history over the centuries. So the idea in the beginning of this was to kind of remix, to kind of celebrate, not to celebrate, but to honor the 1-year anniversary of the fire, was to redo the previous concert, but to actually make it available for everything. So what was done by the sound engineer was basically to remix and rebalance everything from the conductor's position, trying to mute instruments when they weren't playing, and to have a real balance. And this is different. The idea was to mix it for the conductor position and then see what happens in the rest of the room. And this is quite different from the usual mixing approach of a sound engineer, who basically creates kind of something with high precision and high clarity at the sacrifice of physical reality. So in contrast to the virtual reality production, we decided to fix the listener positions, and then to avoid people being required to wear head trackers or VR equipment for the hour and a half of the whole concert. We chose to pre-render everything in spatial audio, choosing the binaural conditions, which means there's some degradation for not having individual HRDFs. I won't go into too much of that. I want to reemphasize that this was all done during the period of strictest COVID home confinement. So we were all working from home and remotely connecting to mixing consoles and simulation devices during this. So again, we still had the same problem of some crosstalk rejection. We tried to mute things when we could, but that wasn't always possible. And then there's also a passage in the concert where the children's choir actually walks down the middle of the audience, and we didn't actually have microphones in that position, so we had to use the ambient microphones and some kind of tricks to simulate that aspect of the concert. So this was diffused publicly, so we set it up a web page. In addition to the full concert, we also took some extracts that we thought were interesting. Here you can see the different positions that were made available, from the conductor's position to a near audience, a medium audience, and then the end of the audience position. We also included a questionnaire to try and get some feedback from people. And again, so the whole concert was about an hour and 20 minutes, and you can use that QR code if you want. I'm going to give a bit of statistics because I think it's kind of interesting to see how this was viewed by the world. So far it's been viewed almost 8,000 times, but then if you kind of filter out all the bots and searches and things, you get about a little under 10% of those are actually people who stayed on for more than 3 minutes. And then about 3% of those people stayed on for more than an hour. So that gives us an idea of how many people listened to either just the questionnaire, the excerpts, or went through the whole concert. We have a little under half coming from within France. So we have a pretty good coverage in most of the continents, except for Africa. And there's still some there. Also, in terms of hardware, I think it's interesting to see what people are using to kind of to see these kind of experiences. So the vast majority are coming on desktop computers, followed by about a quarter on phone devices, and we get about 50-50 between iOS and Android devices, and a little under half are using the Chrome browsers, with about a third doing Safari. So that kind of helps in future productions to know where to focus kind of the technical design of things. Also from the questionnaire, we get some interesting feedback. One is we have a broad range of ages, so kind of seems to have hit quite a large population, which was quite good. much more people connecting over Wi-Fi than wired or cell phone connection. So that's also interesting. We asked people to rate the quality of their headphones. There was no way to kind of test that, but basically people are listening with fairly good headphones. We also asked people what their familiarity with room acoustic simulations and binaural was, and we're getting a good range of that. Of course, I think some of the people that actually responded to the questionnaire are maybe kind of more in the research side or the scientific side or are techno savvy, but we did get a good mix of people not knowing anything about it as well. We also were interested in how many people had already been to Notre Dame, how many people had seen a concert in Notre Dame. And there we also have a wide range of people who had either never been there or once a long time ago. So that kind of satisfied our objective to share this really with people outside of those who could be there for the concert or who regularly visit Notre Dame. We also asked some other more technical questions. So it showed that it was definitely clear when you could change position that there was an acoustic effect. The consideration, the rendering was considered quite realistic, though there was room for improvement. It wasn't the best, and we kind of know what some of those defects are. We were interested if people were disturbed by the lack of visual imagery. So it was noticed, but it wasn't extremely problematic. So it was more of a radio show than with people looking at their computers. So that took a bit of adjusting. The conductor's position was usually judged as a quite high quality, and we can imagine that because of the high clarity and the proximity to the things. The artistic mix, which didn't respect any physical reality, was also quite highly judged. But we also note that every single version was both highly rated and worst rated from at least one person. So that kind of shows that there's a very different set of user expectations in this kind of situation. Questions regarding the future were kind of, is there an interest to do more virtual productions? And that seems quite largely in favor. And we even asked about, would anyone be interested in kind of following live streaming events and things like that? And that's also, people are quite highly in favor. So that kind of leads us to our next project, which is planned for next summer. Again, on the anniversary, hopefully, of the opening of Notre Dame, after all the reconstruction. And here we're kind of looking towards a broadcast musical experience that will give kind of a musical tour of the history of Notre Dame. And the idea is to provide a select group of pieces kind of spanning history, with each piece performed in a virtual acoustic rendering appropriate to the period, as we kind of see the evolution of the acoustics of Notre Dame. The idea is to have the performers actually playing in the virtual acoustics, so they respond to the kind of acoustic return that they have, but it'll probably be a delayed broadcast and not a live broadcast to allow for technical limitations of having so many musicians and issues like that. And we're kind of viewing it as an edutainment concert where in between each piece, there'll probably be some kind of explanation of the historical relevance of both the piece and of the architecture. And that concludes my presentation. Sorry, that was a bit abrupt at the end, but that's all I have.
No, thank you very much, Brian Katz, for being so flexible, jumping in a bit earlier than planned, and for sharing your research, going into a bit more technical detail, and for sharing these very special projects with us. We're looking forward to what you're coming up with next.
Oh, I should add that we are also doing projects on theater, because I know there were some earlier presentations on that. So we are also looking at kind of virtual theater performances, but I didn't present any of that. Sorry.
You can talk to that, and like talk in the final debate. You can pick that topic and talk about it with, for example, Pablo and Francisco. Now we will then take our first break of about 10 minutes. I think that should be around 11:30 before we then continue with two more keynotes by Henrik Oppermann and Tim Summers, as well as Luke Ritchie. If you in the audience have any questions to the panelists, please feel free to write them in a chat, and we will try to include them in the panel discussion at the end. Thank you for listening so far, and see you all again in 10 minutes at 11:30. Welcome back. I hope you had some time to get a cup of coffee and to clear your head for our upcoming topics. We would like to continue now with 3 more keynotes before we start our panel discussion. 2 more keynotes as we move Brian up with his keynote already. But picking up the topic of 3D audio and classical music from before our break, I would like to introduce our 2 next speakers now, Tim Summers and Henrik Oppermann. Tim Summers is a violinist at the International Mahler Chamber Orchestra, or MCO, where he leads a virtual reality and spatial project called Future Presence. In addition, Tim is co-director of the Charlottesville Chamber Music Festival, and he teaches violin at the Berlin University of the Arts. Having studied English and American literature at Harvard University and violin at Juilliard School, he was artist in residence at the Danish Institute of Electroacoustic Music in Aarhus, Denmark. Currently, he's developing software for sound analysis in Unity and a low-level binary codification of tonal harmony for use in both music analysis and generation. Henrik Oppermann is a 3D sound specialist, the founder of Schallgeber and head of sound for ambio-immersive audio at Sennheiser. With Sennheiser, for example, Henrik was involved in the early stages of development of the Ambio VR microphone. Formerly the head of sound at Visualize, Henrik Oppermann has experience in recording studio quality audio on location for film, advertising, music industry, and 3D sound installations. Henrik has developed hardware and software audio applications for VR collaborations with leading sound partners. And this year, he became the Mahler Chamber Orchestra's first artistic partner for immersive sound, for immersive experience. Sorry, I should really know that phrase. As such, he's crucial for the ensemble's exploration of spatial sound as a meaningful way to experience music and the orchestra. Tim and Henrik will now present Future Presence, exploring how immersive VR recordings can change the way people listen to real concerts. Tim and Henrik, the stage is yours.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Janina, and thank you also to the Aura group for inviting us to come speak. It's been really interesting to hear how many perspectives are possible, even within this, within the boundaries of this topic. And I look forward to talking about it afterwards. Our presentation will be in 3 parts. The first part will be a movie that we have in production, a little trailer about what the whole project is. Then in a more discursive way, I'll go through what the project is with Henrik a little bit, and to discuss it in terms of whichever adjectives come up during the time of the presentation. And then at the end, we'll have a short film, which is exactly as long as the Charles Ives unanswered question, in which people will give their impressions of our presentation of the unanswered question, which was back about 2 weeks ago in Elisabethkirche in Berlin. So if we could just start with the first movie, then I think that will send us on our way.
We are currently at the Meistersaal in Berlin, and we are doing an immersive recording of the full orchestra of the Mahler Chamber Orchestra. The first one was a quintet in Elisabethkirche. The second one was a piece with 10 musicians from Charles Ives, also in Elisabethkirche, and now we needed this nice sounding space to create this immersive experience with 48 musicians.
And what we're doing now is pushing the technique as far as we can in terms of the number of musicians and increasing the musical complexity. But it was not only about increasing technical and musical challenges, it was also about exploring the space. And in the case of Midsummer Night's Dream, it's really about exploring VR space as a theater for sound.
You're going to be thrown into the whole orchestra, and you're getting an exclusive view and listening position in it.
You're just there, and you feel like it's just for you. And not only do you have this amazing sound of what's happening,
but you can actually get close to the musicians and walk around, and you're there, you're inside, you're like part of the performance.
Working with classical music and orchestras is nice, but working with the Mahler chamber is very, very special because they are young and dynamic and very fresh in spirit and wanting to explore.
The combination of technology and the MCO seems to be a perfect match.
While we record the sound, we always already think about also the visual and how to present us as an orchestra, I would say.
Because most important is that it allows us to emphasize how participatory the music making is.
It's about communication, about timing, breathing, feeling, emotion.
This project is quite unique because the hardware that we have, the space that we have, the musicians that we have, it's all just first class.
With the goggles and the headphones to really hear the acoustics of a room, how fast it changed from 1 meter to the next meter, and that was really impressive for me.
Reaching people that would never normally go to a concert. At the end of the day, it's just music. People love music. It's a chance for us to say, come and experience our music and see if you like that too.
I don't think it's any competition to go and see a live concert, but I think it's just going to add a different level of experience.
Okay, so that should give an introduction. I think what we've concentrated on is the extent to which we can match the aesthetic and communicative goals of the orchestra with the medium that's growing now, and with the possibilities of space. And it's turned out to be a very rich investigation. So the MCO is a little bit a special kind of orchestra. It's made up of people from about 20 countries, give or take. And it operates very much as a network. We often have guests come in, and we especially concentrate on specific projects with artistic partners. And this gives a kind of a focus to our generally touring presentation. And it's actually with this touring presentation, we hope to be able to integrate VR capacities as they mature. The MCO started in about 1997, again, give or take, under the leadership of Claudio Abbado. And I guess it might seem a little bit 20th century to bring in a conductor of this type, but I think that what we found is that we can deal with questions which are persistent about music and ideas that are persistent, and most especially the idea of how we listen to each other as we play. And so it's safe to say that that Claudio had a lot to do with this and making sure that people were aware of this as a part of their music making, and it's really been a consistent part of how we've made our choices of what to do and what to pursue musically. And so I wanted to talk just a little bit generally, again from the orchestral standpoint, and Henrik can break in to add things from his a sort of audio musical standpoint to discuss what the goals are of this project. And I think as a starting point, there's a lot of talk about interaction and what interaction means in VR, but in a digital life in general. But I think it's also true that interaction in real life is by no means a solved problem, and we've always been working with the idea of actual interaction and what it means to interact in sound. So that's what we've always done, and it's what we can continue to do. And there are certain things about how we pursue projects which are really about how to activate the audience. The audience is listening by activating our own listening, so that insofar as people pay attention to us, it's because we are paying attention to each other, and this creates a sort of a spiral. And this is a fact of theater. It's a little bit like having a play within a play, but it's much more fluid and active and music based. And what we found is that the 6 degree of freedom audio that we've developed gives a very, very interesting perspective on how we are working as people with one another. We made a conscious choice not to pursue a kind of anechoic strategy, because what we wanted to capture was the extent to which we were working with each other was one of the foundational elements of what we do. So we wanted that to be part of the recording, even if it wasn't technically sort of an acoustic fact. It was a social fact, and it had to do with the timing of everything that we do and how we do stuff. And I think also the idea of the fact that we could get 40, 50 people together to do something is a kind of coherence that's really important to be able to show, and that it happens throughout this network of people, and the different perspectives within it can show really different things about the pieces we're playing. It's also true that, kind of parallel with the idea of context in general, that one of the things we try to do as musicians is to make spaces come to life. And I think this is a very interesting problem in VR, where you think, well, what is this space, and is there anybody here, and what sort of resonance can it have? And I think it's something we can ask the right questions about, and give things that warm it up as a medium. And so I think above all is something we want to pursue both in virtual digital media, is that we are building relationships and understanding with sound, and we're showing how this works in real time. And this is what we're after as an orchestra, and it matched very nicely with what we could pursue in this medium. And I think it's also important to say that that working with Henrik means really treating digital audio as something that we regard as something that has the potential to expose the meanings that we pursue in real life. And so we chose not to treat this as an outside technical project that would sort of give us a new audience, but to treat it as something we can artistically pursue on terms that we knew. And this is, I think it's a general principle of how the orchestra works, that it's very important to us that, the office is part of the orchestra, and that the partners we work with are people who we treat as collaborators. And so this is definitely a part of how we're working with this project. And I think that also, aesthetically speaking, what we want to bring is the ability for people to pay very close attention, so that then when they go to a concert, they're able to change the way they listen in a way which I hope will be able to slip out of the boundaries of genre and much more into the area of activity, to think about what are these people doing, how are these people doing this together, and then we can escape some of the traps without fighting them. We can simply change the focus of attention from genre and sort of social hierarchies to activity in real life, or virtual life for that matter. So we've recorded 3 pieces, each of which is meant to be a prototype, but each will be really a working installation when we are done. We have one small one with 5 people, a Mozart G minor string quintet, just one movement. And this was the first one we did, and I think it's what exposed to us the possibilities of this medium. What I think jumped out to me as a musician was that the spatial qualities of a person being able, the spatial qualities of the quintet itself reflected the spaces inside of the score. And so when you see something, well, I don't know if you can, I can't point at anything, but you can see shapes inside of the score, and these things became palpable in a way that was surprisingly physical, in which you could develop a perspective on as you walked around. So there was a way that being in this space seemed like looking inside the score and inside a performance at the same time. And being able to view it from different people's perspectives really brought out the importance of the idea of voicing. And in Mozart, this is very, very important, how people can sort of sing together and yet be in a sort of a social disagreement with one another. So things come together very well, but everyone is really viewing, even within his music, is viewing their own situation from a very particular perspective, and it's very interesting to hear. The second piece we did, which should be a sort of a ground for making more experimental music in the future, was Charles Ives' Unanswered Question, which is a piece which places the players in different parts of the hall. Ives asks that the strings be off stage, and it's also about disagreements, where basically the flutes are fighting with the trumpet because the trumpet is asking them a question that they cannot answer or understand, and the strings are supposed to be sort of all-knowing demigods, which is, of course, a position we like to occupy. So we've been, and one interesting thing also was that the subtitle of this piece was it was a cosmic landscape, and this was a situation where we could take his instructions from the score and really and invert them, sort of, and it's like they came out just right in VR when you place them into a new landscape. And what was also interesting about this is it's a foundational piece of experimental music, and it has these philosophical backgrounds reaching back to transcendentalism in American philosophy, but also it kept coming up, and Leonard Bernstein used this piece as a way of expressing tensions between tonality in music and atonality in music, and it seems like the piece just keeps delivering in terms of its musical and spatial content. Then last is Mendelssohn, the Midsummer Night's Dream, and this is also a piece which we chose specifically for its thematic relationship to virtuality. I mean, not only is it an extraordinarily beautiful piece, but the piece itself is about dreams and visions and seeing things which are not there. And it's actually kind of a foundational work, not only for English literature, but also for German literature, because Schlegel, who translated Shakespeare into German, which was a very important step in German Romanticism, was an uncle of Mendelssohn, and Mendelssohn was reading Schlegel's translations and chose, at that point, he was 17 years old, that this would be his defining idea of what it means to be an artist, and in particular, this thing of giving shapes and giving to airy nothing a local habitation and a name is something that I thought was very nice to have in the background of VR. So in addition to all that, there were ideas we could borrow from theater, and ideas of theater, whether they were physical theater or just theater of mind, they all fit in there together. So what we've developed is something which we can take on tour, and we're gradually optimizing it further and further so it becomes more and more tourable. And we hope to have news on that very soon. And we also think we can send it, well, we have been using it as a gallery installation on the side of concerts, and people come and listen, and then they would go to a concert. We've presented it quite a lot of places. We've used it at the Orchesterzentrum in Nordrhein-Westfalen, for example, showing it to students. And I think that there's very interesting possibilities for how the patterns that we're developing could be used for education, particularly showing how what the physical realities are of making sound, because there are a lot of things that you can see in VR that are kind of more than you can explain. And so we have many things coming up, residencies and demonstrations. And then finally, on April 10th at Radialsystem, we'll present all of them in the context of a real concert. And I think that this concert will serve as a sort of a summary of our investigations. There will be a real concert, and we want to involve the idea of space in as many ways as we can. For example, Nico Muhly's violin concerto, which will be played by Pekka Kuusisto, is called Shrink and is about the spaces and intervals. George Benjamin's, we think we'll do George Benjamin, but he's very involved in the space of timbre and how that's a space of its own, and then we'll juxtapose a recording of Mendelssohn against a real performance of Mendelssohn. And we also want to use the space of Radialsystem as something that has sound all over it. So spatial sound will be embedded in the idea that we're using with this building itself as a theater for sound. It's also been very important for us that we maintain focus on sound as our essential medium, because I think that even building in a virtual world is too much for any one person or any small set of persons or even an enormous company. So this is something that's going to happen with a lot of collaboration and a lot of cultural input. So that's where we're left, and I think that perhaps I will say, just as a matter for progress, that this is something we think can also work well in XR environments as they develop, and we're really looking to make sure that we bring this type of recording into the future, because it contains a lot of good musical information.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be that, and I think we can now show the second movie. How are we for time?
We are here at the beautiful Elisabethkirche in Berlin Mitte, and we just experienced music in a very digital way, with a very exquisite sound. It's been very impressive.
I think movement is encouraged here, so it's really nice to walk through the space and also have the surprising effect of musicians in different spots.
And it seemed like the musicians were having a musical conversation with each other.
It's a new experience for me. So putting on the glasses, I felt quite unbalanced at the beginning, like I had to find my balance again. But once I found that, then I could trust my feet, that they were in the same space as my mind. And I could walk around and go really close to the musicians, hear them breathing, hear them playing, walk through the musicians, which made me laugh. And yeah, it was a very exciting experience.
Usually with traditional concerts, we are far away from the musicians. Here, I was able to see the musicians from different perspectives. I really felt the musicians closer to me, which I don't get that opportunity often.
The first time for me, and it was really impressive, like very nice, not just real, but also very inspiring in a way. Like this, especially the sound experience was very interesting for me. The fact that I could walk through the quartet of flutes, that was it's a thing that you can't do in a classical concert.
I felt it was translated so well. The audio worked really high quality, seamless transitions between, left and right and rear and front. I was able to experiment a little bit with it while walking around and really not losing at any moment.
I was looking forward to experiencing classical music in a different way that is maybe even more accessible to someone like me who doesn't have the professional training, to make myself more focused and more excited about it.
Beyond just being an installation. It's something that, in my opinion, had artistic merit to it.
The sound was more present than the people. They were kind of pixelated, ghost-like, virtual presences, and it was really interesting to get this feeling that the sound is more concrete and more tangible than the physical presence of the musicians.
Well, a normal concert experience, you're static. I mean, you sit in one location and you aren't able to move. So that was interesting. I liked to be standing and moving and free in a way. It was very freeing, in fact. I think it's important to understand what opportunities are available to us with current and new technologies. And I think music has a long and interesting relationship with technology anyway. So I think it's important to explore this. So I praise you and your colleagues for doing this. And it's a great and exciting experiment to be able to see.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see maybe the future of how concerts could be, and yes, definitely recommend. Yeah.
Was just amazing. I didn't expect it. This experience was unique.
It was a lovely experience. I really enjoyed experiencing this wonderful piece, played so wonderfully by the members of MCO. It's a nice place to be, and I just wish it went on longer. Maybe I'll go again for another round.
Okay, so okay, I think we're out of time now. Before we go on, I would just like to say, of course, I did a lot of talking because Henrik was a late addition to this program, and I said it as fast as I could. But there's plenty for him to add in the conversations upcoming. So please do ask him questions if you have them. Also, I have a small essay on the Ives, which is available in the resources section, which gives a little more sort of academic detail toward how we're choosing these pieces. And so thank you all for your attention, and I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim Summers, for your introduction to the Mahler Chamber Orchestra's future presence. And thank you to Henrik Oppermann, who will then be a less silent participant in the panel discussion at the end. We will stay in the orchestra world now with our next speaker, Luke Ritchie, who is creative technology advisor for the San Francisco Symphony, working with their music director, Esa-Pekka Salonen. Luke spent the last decade using technology to connect orchestras with a growing audience beyond the traditional concert hall. He is also creative and strategic consultant for Reactional Music, a music startup that uses a real-time music engine to transform music in games. Before that, Luke was digital director at the Philharmonia Orchestra in London. In his keynote now, Luke will take a closer look at the virtual orchestra and how, in a world of spatial computing, we can address the creative and technical challenges of reaching new audiences that might expect to interact with this new landscape. A very warm welcome to Luke Ritchie.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's lovely to be here, and I've been so impressed and inspired by all of the presentations I've seen, and lots of fantastic parallels. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to zoom through this presentation just to kind of explain my strategic approach and where I'm coming from. I've just recently started working with the San Francisco Symphony. And I'm very much taking a similar approach to the one that I took with the Philharmonia Orchestra over the last decade. And so essentially, I see the role of, certainly for, for orchestras, I see ultimately technology is key in connecting with new audiences beyond the concert hall. So We're not trying to replace the concert hall. That will always be the kind of final destination. But I think that, you know, a lot of the work that, you know, I've done and still kind of informs the work that I do is ultimately very simple, is ultimately picking up the audience member and putting them inside the orchestra, wrapping the orchestra around them, kind of using these immersive technologies to allow people to explore and be involved in orchestral music in a different way. And I think orchestral music is so well suited to that, actually. I think over the years, I've realized it's such a great medium for that because it's so dense and layered. It's really perfectly suited for that kind of work. But also, I think it's so important about making the orchestra visible to audiences, you know, beyond the concert hall. So picking up the orchestra, putting it somewhere unexpected, you know, whether online or in a physical location, which is a lot of the work that I've done. And kind of underneath that key mission, you know, the main goals are obviously we want to make genuinely exciting new artistic experiences. And Esa-Pekka Salonen has been such a pioneer in this field, and he's so genuinely engaged with this with these new technologies and wants to, you know, I agree with him that orchestras need to be at the heart of this conversation, and it's going to transform music, and we should be part of that and creating new art. As I've said, it's all about reaching new audiences, and then also very importantly generating new revenue streams for the orchestra. So I'm going to zoom through this. When I started at the Philharmonia in 2014, you know, I inherited some fantastic projects that had already been underway for years. I think, you know, one of the biggest game changers that informed all of my work going forward was a project called Rewrite, where essentially it was taking the orchestra, picking it up, putting it in a large, you know, beautiful exhibition space down the river from the Royal Festival in London, and allowing the audience members to walk through the orchestra across 10 rooms. And it was actually primarily, it was projection based, 30 projection screens across 10 rooms, but actually it was primarily an audio experience, as that each one of these screens had a speaker that played that part of the orchestra. And for me, that was really the paradigm that, you know, I inherited at the Philharmonia and has informed the work going forward. I think that idea that, you know, you break all the barriers down for the orchestra, you let them walk through the orchestra. And I think over the years, you just realized that actually 2D screens and even stereo, you know, is wonderful, but actually you want to get away from that sea of anonymous faces. And that's where audio is so important, and spatial audio is so important. So a large part of my work was touring kind of location-based immersive exhibitions and taking the orchestra somewhere unexpected. But obviously when I started in 2014, virtual reality was having this renaissance with Oculus, and its DK2 headset came out. So we made our first 360 film. And again, for us, it was really important to try and get the audio as good as possible. So in 2015, when we filmed it, it was still very tricky to get proper spatial audio. So we used binaural microphones for, you know, individual stereo binaural feeds that you blended between as you turned your head, which back then was really quite tricky to do. We had to make a bespoke build in Unity. But also in terms of a mix, it was really raw. It was very, you know, those microphones are very small. You can't really do anything with the mix. It is what it is. And binaural is fantastic, but it sounds like you're sitting in the front row of the orchestra with Esa-Pekka in front of you. So the sound was very unbalanced. It was all violas, and, you know, large parts of the orchestra were really distant. But actually, there was a real immediacy and energy to that mix, which I actually love. I was terrified of playing it to the players and playing it to, you know, kind of audiophiles. You know, classical music listeners aren't known for tolerating low quality audio. But actually, I think it worked really well. It was really visceral. It was really energetic. It was Sibelius 5. And in the last kind of, you know, moments of the final movement, you can hear Esa-Pekka's baton kind of flick through the air, and you can hear the pages turn. So there was actually like a rawness and an energy to it that was interesting. And there was a rawness to the mix that actually, you know, has value. So we toured that. To be honest, it was a bit of a PR move, trying to get ourselves, you know, on the front foot. It was an explorative kind of prototype, a test, because Esa-Pekka was curious, and we had the reputation to unlock those relationships to try it. But actually what was so lovely is it got a great reception. Classical fans responded really positively to it, and it complemented the larger projection-based installations. And so the story of VR was really, it felt like pushing at an open door, where we found there was a lot of demand for it. We started to build on it, and it led to future films. So we met with Google. They commissioned a second film, Beethoven's Fifth, which was wonderful because Google commissioned it. And we actually, you know, we moved with multi-camera edits, and particularly on the audio front, we moved into proper spatial audio, ambisonic microphones, and a proper ambisonic mix. Whereas you jump positions in the orchestra, you actually heard those different positions. And with that knowledge, we kind of learned how to do it ourselves, and we worked with, you know, a kind of small network of spatial audio teams and games developers and people in the VR space to make a third live capture of Esa-Pekka conducting Mahler's third. But for me, one of the big challenges of VR was, you know, and all of these experiences talking about is they're very isolating, you know, is that, you know, you're still quite a solitary experience. And when you have headphones on, that isolates you from other people, but also the dynamics are so rich of orchestral music. It's just very difficult to play something as varied as, you know, say Mahler 3, where you can hear, you know, the tiniest sounds, and then you go to 100 musicians playing at full volume. You just can't support that kind of dynamic range with headphones. It's very difficult. So actually, you know, we were like, how do we make VR more accessible, more communal? And we built this thing called the VR Soundstage, which was essentially a large circular speaker array we called the VR Soundstage. And the first time I played it back, it was just night and day, the difference. You know, I knew that the violin was there next to me because I could hear that it was there next to me. And I suddenly realized, oh, right, we do audio, which really should have been very obvious. But it was kind of a really key eureka moment for me. So basically, we toured that. We took it to South by Southwest, and then we toured it internationally. And we kind of it was inside a projection cylinder sometimes, or sometimes in another format, and that worked, you know, really well. And we were building on that. And really, the thing I want to talk about today a lot was the next phases. For the last 2 years of my time at the Philharmonia Orchestra, I worked on a large R&D project, which was really all about reimagining live performance for immersive technologies, you know, VR, AR, MR. What does that actually mean? What are the implications of that? So sorry, I'm just going to resize that. I'm just trying to see everything at the same time. That's better. So we basically joined a consortium of a lot of key arts organizations from other disciplines. We were the only musical partner. Royal Shakespeare Company were the lead, Punch Drunk Theatre were a fantastic partner, Manchester International Festival, and a wonderful VR company called Marshmallow Laser Feast, who I'll talk about a bit more. We had some fantastic tech partners, so we got to experiment with mixed reality with Magic Leap, Intel and Epic Games, who create the game Fortnite and own the games engine Unreal, which was really interesting because I felt that so much of what we were doing was moving into the games engine, and you know, that's technically, but also creatively. I felt that as you begin to build these spatial experiences, we were asking creative questions that games developers were discussing, you know, decades ago. So it was a great opportunity to work with, you know, games developers, theatre practitioners, a whole range of different people. And there were kind of 3 areas of focus I was going to talk about, and 2 of them were very much focused on spatial audio. So essentially, we did a lot of work, and we worked with Henrik, and it's fantastic to see the work that he's done with the Mahler Chamber Orchestra. And I love all the work they do anyway. But we did a lot of experimentation of trying recording different ways of recording. So with, you know, an array of different microphones, or with close mics, you know, trying a blend of the two. You know, we did a lot of recording, and we recorded a chamber quartet in the same way as the Mahler Chamber Orchestra. You could walk around it and experience it. And then we also, you know, did other experiments with a singular player, and we tried, and then a lot of the work was actually playing that stuff back, you know, playing it back through on a VR headset, on a AR tablet, on a mixed reality Magic Leap headset, and trying it through headphones, open back headphones, speakers. And I think that this has come through in the other presentations, is that just experimentation was so important. You know, we just need to try this stuff. You need to try this stuff in a space. You need to try it with an audience, see how they respond. And you need to work with the players and bring in, you know, the musicians. And I think that's what's so exciting about, you know, what Henrik and Tim are doing, is that actually it's brilliant that they've got Henrik embedded in the orchestra, and it's a close collaboration with the artist. I think that's so important. So we did a lot of playback, and the, you know, the kind of aim of that was we were going to create a kind of 6 Degrees of Freedom VR experience on a large scale. We were going to reimagine Midsummer Night's Dream in a location-based setting, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. But kind of a few key lessons that I got from the the R&D, particularly in spatial audio, was that the current pipeline of recording this stuff, mixing it, is very technical and it's very exclusive. And so, you know, what we found really challenging is there's just very few people like Henrik who have this expertise, you know, who have the musical sensitivity to actually know how to record this stuff and how to mix it. And, you know, it's actually really tricky to bring other musicians and other people with a great degree of expertise into this space. So, you know, what I often found was like, how do we make the mix process better? You know, how do we bring the musicians in? Where do we listen back to this stuff? Like, what are the rooms that we listen to? And also, how do we think about the musical mix? So sometimes there's a real tension between using the best mics for the best technical capture, the most spatially accurate recording of what you want. And then, but you might not be thinking about, well, actually just these mics, these 1920s ribbon mics or whatever you're using, just sound fantastic. And they're brilliant for this kind of repertoire. And so there was a tension between, you know, the musical expertise and actually the technical challenges of what you're trying to do. And I think the key thing for that is to try and bring in much more people from the wider music scene, not just musicians and players, but actually the traditional recording engineers and producers who have that creative insight and that technical expertise. Also, we need to rethink the traditional mixing studio. You know, this is not the kind of stuff that you can sit in a room and mix. I mean, there are only a handful of studios that have the number of speakers that you need. There's a fantastic facility in London called Grand Central Recording Studios. I've been to a fantastic recording studio in Tokyo, NHK's 22.2 surround system. It's phenomenal, but there's about 3 of them around and they're very expensive. But also more creatively, you know, as a lot of my fellow panelists have said, you know, this is work that you need to explore in a space. You're spatially exploring, you're physically exploring and interacting with this landscape of music. So I think we need to rethink how we mix, how we play back the stuff. I think a traditional mixing room is not going to be where you're static, is not going to work. And I've already said, you know, you really need to build cross-disciplinary teams. And that's why I thought I'd talk a little bit about Dream, the process we did, the eventual show that we did, because actually, you know, that goes beyond spatial audio, but I think it shows just all the challenges we met both creatively and technically, and how cross-disciplinary we needed to be. So I think one of the most exciting, I mean, I loved all the partners. It was a wonderful project, but, you know, I'd wanted to work with Punch Drunk for a very long time. They've made, you know, immersive theatre for 20 years now, and their piece Sleep No More is absolutely fantastic. And if you haven't seen, probably a lot of you are familiar with it, but actually it's great to work with people who know how to direct and guide an audience and how to engage an audience in a physical space that's exploratory. And one of the best projects we did on the R&D was that they commissioned the Philharmonia to record excerpts of Bluebeard's Castle by Bartók, and actually we then got to re-record every single section in beautiful isolation spatially, and they then laid that out across their beautiful demonstration space in London, and that was just an audio-led piece. And what was so fascinating about that was that, you know, just having all of those different sectionals preserved in aspect were just stunning. And they said they were overwhelmed by the wealth of what they had. They could have just worked with the cello section alone. It was because this music is so rich and so dense and so interesting to explore, that, you know, that was one of the most exciting projects. And I think that also showed the value of working with theatre practitioners who are used to working in this space. Another thing that I want to touch on, and this is kind of speaks to my role with Reactional, is that, you know, I also think that as much as people want to physically explore this thing, it's very physical, it's tangible. We want to have that human sense of exploring these immersive experiences. We also have to have a meaningful sense of agency and interactivity musically. Again, that's been touched on by Pablo and Francesca and lots of people here, is that, you know, how do you allow the audience to engage? And I, you know, got very excited about the work that the composer Jesper Nordin is doing. He's based in Stockholm, and he founded this company and he created this tool it was called Gestument, and now it's called Reactional. And essentially it's about reimagining composition for immersive landscapes. How can someone's movement or actions actually have musical, you know, how can non-musically experienced audience members meaningfully engage with the music? And I tried a lot of pieces of interactive music software, and it's very hard to make interactive musical software. And what I loved about this is that It allows anyone with their hand movement or moving a prop or their finger on a tablet or a phone screen to actually, whatever they play is in time and in tune with the music. And it's very granular on a musical level. So as the composer, as the sound designer, you can really make that interaction granular. You can choose what instrument they are. You can choose, you know, the all kinds of musical parameters to really make it an enriching experience. And so this is a quick demo of Jesper jamming with Martin Frost on a Xbox Connect. It just immediately gives you an idea of what it could be like for an audience member, say in VR or something else. Oh, let me jump to that now, just and I'll come back. So, you know, I immediately love that. And so for me, that was a key aspect. And we really explored what that means for composition. What does that mean for a composer who could make a work that will change depending on how the audience engages with it? That could maybe be a, you know, a rules-based composition to some degree that's actually shiftable, that's changeable. So one of the other really exciting partners for me, and again, we've touched on this, is that a lot of the work that we've done was very literal, you know, and a lot of the work we're talking about here is very literal about, you know, we are recreating the concert hall, whether we recreate the acoustic or the physicality of it, or we are, you know, capturing the players. And that's a lot of what I did at the Philharmonia was actually, we, you know, in a way it's very simple conceptually. We were filming them in 360, and a lot of the work we were doing in R&D was looking at volumetrically capturing someone, or, you know, and that's very much what's being explored in with Mahler Chamber Orchestra in terms of capturing them with other devices. There are huge technical challenges to that, as I think most of you will know. It's just incredibly hard and incredibly expensive to do that at the moment. But also, I think that, you know, in a way, if what we do is musical and audio led, it's very exciting to strip away that literal visual layer, because if you're in a virtual space, would you want to be in a completely literal recreation of that? I don't think necessarily there's an either or there, but I was very attracted to companies like Marshmallow Laser Feast, who make, you know, have a particular aesthetic, particle-based aesthetic in their VR. A lot of their work is about, you know, exploring beautiful organic landscapes, and I felt that that resonated really well with what we were doing. So we worked with Marshmallow Laser Feast and Royal Shakespeare Company to kind of recreate the world of Midsummer Night's Dream, and it wasn't going to be photorealistic. It was going to be of a particular aesthetic, and the idea had been that pre-pandemic that we were going to create this large location-based immersive experience in Stratford-upon-Avon in 2020. But of course, coronavirus had other plans for us. So we ended up making a very different experience called Dream. And essentially, instead of giving the audience that kind of musical agency and rendering them in VR, we thought we couldn't make something that was exclusively for VR when everyone was isolated at home. Very few people could afford VR headsets. So actually what we did is we captured 5 RSC actors in a motion capture stage in Portsmouth, and the University of Portsmouth are absolutely fantastic, absolutely, you know, leagues ahead in terms of, you know, motion capture, volumetric capture, all forms of immersive work. Their immersive, their CCXR, their Center for XR in Portsmouth is fantastic and worth checking out if you're looking for a partner in the UK. And so we had 5 actors who were captured in mocap suits, and they were performing a live performance of Midsummer Night's Dream, and we'd recreated this whole forest in the world of Midsummer Night's Dream, and it was running in real time in Unreal. It was technologically a huge feat. And for us, we wanted to give the performers musical superpowers. So their movement, each one of the characters was given an instrument. And so we had recorded score that was there that came in at moments, but also Puck, when the performance starts, they would be performing and their movement was driving a gentle kind of melodic line of harp. Again, it was MIDI, which was a real taboo. Again, slightly terrified about bringing that up, but with Esa-Pekka's blessing, we felt that like we can't have these taboos, and it was something we had to explore. Again, we'd wanted to work with live musicians, but we had such strict limitations during COVID that we couldn't do that. And I think that certainly for an audience member, to give them superpowers is fantastic. So I've got a short clip here of the opening scene where the performer playing Puck is very meta. You meet the performers and then you watch them turn into their avatars. So I'll just play it for a couple of minutes and you see them entering into the world of Midsummer Night's Dream. That's all being rendered in real time. And the harp line that you hear is all being driven by the tool Reactional. And then I'll come back to a bit about the team.
All good. Thanks. Okay, we're ready. As soon as we get in there, you will see me become Puck. Wish me luck. Stay close to me. If it gets too dark, find my way. Stay close.
So hopefully you get an idea of, what fun that was. And obviously what we really wanted to do was to give the audience those superpowers and let them all be a different instrument. But actually, as we went into this process, it was wonderful. COVID didn't help, but we've all been through that, seeing all the challenges everyone here has been through. But actually, it was just working in a real-time games engine, working in this kind of way in spatial audio, but also in a range of issues. It just opened up so many challenges. It was a creative and technical challenge, and it really required a cross-disciplinary team. So I thought it was just worth pausing a moment just to talk about our process, because I hope that's helpful to explain, how we did this. So essentially, we did have three, large orchestral works that have been recorded for the work as kind of traditional score. So we had, a piece by Salonen himself, a piece by Jesper Nordin, and then we had Daphnis and Chloe, Suite Number 2 by Ravel. And we recorded them full orchestra, spatially recorded, absolutely beautiful in spatial audio. And we had our traditional recording team that we work with a lot, and then we would normally bring in the spatial audio expertise to actually add the layers of spatial audio. But then there were extra layers, because of course, once you're building a virtual world, you've actually got to think about, how do you make this work in a games engine? How do you work with a creative team? Because all of the teams, from Royal Shakespeare Company to Marshmallow Laserfeast, we're all used to working in a particular way. And actually, this couldn't be like a film where it was a finished edit, and then we just say to the audio team, right, stick the score to that. It wasn't going to work because the thing was constantly shifting. It was like a live theatre show. So we had to be able to trigger cues of live music, but we also had to give that sound world an entire sound. What does the forest sound like? What do your footsteps sound like? You know, if you jump on a log, what sound does it make? So we had to think about Foley. We had to think about a sound world. And who on earth can manage that kind of disparate team? Because, you know, there aren't many people in that world. We were very, very lucky. It was to have someone as experienced as Anastasia Devana, who was, until just before then, had been audio director at Magic Leap. And she had this kind of broad experience of doing sound for games, but also working with like Industrial Light and Magic for Star Wars experiences. And then she'd also done work with Sigur Rós for their Tenandi Magic Leap experience. And so she had a musical, background as well. So she kind of could see across the board and help to kind of pull together a team that was actually cross-disciplinary. So we had Esa-Pekka very hands-on in terms of, you know, his input creatively on the music and also using his own music. We had Jesper, who was coming at it as a composer, but also as the creative driver of the interactive aspects of Reactional. So we had those two great creative voices working in there. We had a lead producer, Dan Munslow, who's absolute lifesaver for me, who was working, managing the recording, the spatial audio mix, this team on the ground, and then interacting with the online experience as well. So, for the sound world, we actually worked with a game sound designer, Alessandro, who was wonderful, who had to create the whole sound world. What does the forest sound like? What do these landscapes sound like? And I think that as we build these spatial worlds, we can't just think about the music. We are going to have to think about the worlds that we're building. So he was fantastic. He came as well from a musical background, which really helped. A lot of this was a technical challenge. You have to implement these things into a games engine. And we had about 80 people on technical teams, building this whole forest, and they were making it run, working in the motion capture studio, and then broadcasting it onto a 2D screen. Because I should say, the finished work was a 2D experience that people watched as a 2D film, like that clip you saw. And again, that was just really a pandemic-driven fact that we just felt it was too exclusive with publicly funded R&D to make something that was VR based. So people watched it at home, but it was a live performance. It went on, 8 nights across a week, and it was, terrifyingly live. The things that they were doing on stage, the sounds they were making, the cues that we created, if anything went wrong, it would have failed. So I'm just going to find the list. So, you needed Unreal developers who actually mapped Foley to Puck's footsteps, so that when they stepped on a log, or they snapped a twig, or one of the characters was made out of leaves, Peas Blossom, what were the sounds of those leaves when he moved around? Could you hear his arms moving around? So you need to think about those kind of things. And then we had live sound engineers who were experienced at working in a live environment, miking up the actors, blending in the mix of the interactive music and the score and everything else. So, we needed those really experienced live audio music engineers. And then we had audio systems playback who were used to theatre playback systems. Then we had to broadcast it through a broadcast system online. So we had kind of broadcast expertise. So it was a really challenging and stressful, but ultimately wonderful project. And I think that, it just brought up so many different challenges that I hadn't really thought about, that I learned a lot about. When you move into spatial, there are so many creative challenges and technical challenges, and I think it needs to be multidisciplinary. So I'm going to actually stop there. I was going to show some more, but I think time-wise, I'm just going to say I'll be very happy to answer any questions and join the panel later, but that's probably it from me. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Luke Ritchie, for sharing the many exciting projects you've been involved in the past years. I'm sure we will pick up a few of the questions or challenges you raised in your presentation at a later point. We will now take another short break of 5 minutes before we then reconvene with all of our speakers and dive into further discussion at our Q&A panel, which will last about 30 minutes. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat so that we can try to include them in the panel. And we look forward to hearing from you, and see you all again in 5 minutes at around, well, let's say 7 minutes, 12:35. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. including our 8 speakers in a second. We got a lot of exciting perspectives and very complex input from the keynotes. Thank you again for that. For the next 30 minutes, we would like to focus on a few topics that were already partly raised regarding digital technologies and the performing arts sector. And throughout the debate, we would love to add any questions posed in the chat. Maybe we'll already touch on some of them during the debate. If not, then we will pick them up at the end of the panel discussion. The first questions I would like to direct, I can hear some sound. Now it's better. The first questions I would like to direct towards Anastina, Franziska, Pablo, Luc, and Tim. Would you agree that in general, there is a certain reluctance within the, let's say, more established performing arts sector, such as theatre, opera, classical music, or ballet, to leave the stage and sort of transcend the usual frontal presentation format with the support of digital technologies? And if you agree, what do you think is the main reason for this reluctance?
Yeah, okay, thanks. I think it's both true and untrue in a way that I think there is some reluctance that some institutions might struggle with going into or broadening, opening up their field. And this is part true because I think it's a time issue most of the time. I think there's not often the time for experimentation. And they already know their ways, they know how to do some things, and then there's always this time pressure element. But at the same time, there's also a lot of institutions that we can see, and we met during our different projects. Franziska and I met so many people that are advancing and pushing the boundaries of what theater is, what concert houses are, what their work is, and this is both happening at the same time. And I think we see a lot of pioneer work in this field, and I think those work as beacons out there, and other people can see that and then see if they want to adapt the same ways or even do a different version of that. And I think that's what's happening right now. So it's both true and untrue from our perspective, from my perspective at least.
And maybe I could add to that, maybe from since I'm both playing the violin and involved in the VR project, that I think that there's one of the initial reactions is always a sort of a fear of replacement, or the fear that the kinds of things which you're used to doing to make your life go forward are being disrupted. And I think what I find actually encouraging is that there's a sense in which I think as we've worked, we find more and more that there are things about music in particular, and acoustic music in particular, which are very, very hard to pin down and very important. And the kinds of things you can do with your hands, the idea of parametrizing a shift from first position to third position is completely insane. You simply can't do it. And it's one of the things that you learn, and you have it in your hand. You're making millions of decisions about how something should sound in the next few milliseconds. And I don't see that. I see that as being very valuable and something that we can actually point toward, so that I think one of the things we want to do is to show how interesting these things are and how much contact they show. One of the things I notice about VR is that it can give you a tremendous amount of things, and as technologies develop, they'll be able to deliver you more and more sensory information. But contact, in the sort of Michelangelo sense, is not available. And I think that we can point toward the availability of that contact in the outside world by showing how much is going on. And that's what I like about our instrumental standpoint.
Thank you. Maybe Luc and Franziska also to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to think, if I look at the wider kind of music landscape, is that I think actually what I find so wonderful about this these arts organizations like, you know, orchestras and opera and theater, I actually think they are able to take more risks, and they do tend to be actually, I think, really pioneering in a way that actually a lot more kind of commercially, what we call pop music, which is kind of like a gigantic broad term. But actually, I think they, you know, because it's much more commercially driven and rarely funded by the state, I just don't think there is as much experimentation. So, you know, I often think that actually, you know, I think they deserve credit, that a lot of arts organizations, and I rarely give my current government credit, but actually the R&D that they've funded in this space has been really valuable. And a lot of arts organizations, I think, are the right people to take these risks and to think about these things. And I think finally, the audiences I think we want to speak to, actually the audience I think of most is this culturally engaged audience, the kind of that I think are underserved a lot of the time by traditional orchestras. We spend a lot too much time, not that they're not vitally important, but speaking to our core audience. And actually there are a lot of people out there who would, you know, aren't sure about how to dip their toe into this kind of art form. And I think this is a way to reach those culturally engaged audiences who might not think about coming to a concert hall, and it might lead them there. And so I think they are the kind of more kind of risk-prone audiences who are up for trying this stuff.
Yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, more traditional audiences. I also had to think of Anastina, who stressed the fact that they are maybe a venue and more traditional spectre, so to speak. Oh, Brian wants to jump in. Maybe that's good. Anastina, I still want to hear from you, but I'm having audio problems, so maybe Brian, you can jump in very quickly.
I mean, I just wanted to kind of mention some interactions that we've had with musicians. So we're looking more kind of historical productions, but things with like like Baroque ensembles. And so Baroque music was kind of, at some point it was written for like the Chateau de Versailles in the music room of the Queen. And we're trying to kind of work on recreating that concert experience that you can't go to now. So kind of really looking at these kind of virtual spaces that either are non-existent, no longer existent, or inaccessible, and allowing, you know, musicians as well as audience members to come to places that you can't do. And I think that offers a lot of possibility in terms of this future going, not just to reproduce something that you could, you know, tomorrow also go and buy a ticket for, but some places that you could never go to. And I think that offers interest for both the musician to be able to play in that kind of space virtually, and also for the audience members to go to that.
There's maybe one thing I could add. I don't know if I'm interrupting. Anastina, do you have? Oh, okay. I think one thing that can be very sort of upsetting or something is the changing relationship to print. And I think that changes a lot of our industry quite a bit. I mean, it's as true as for the Royal Shakespeare Company as for us, that what we've done for centuries is very reading based. We read dots, they read words, and they're based on a library of works and a collective knowledge that sat on a shelf. And now collective knowledge sits very differently insofar as it sits anywhere at all. And I think that this is one of the unsettling things that we do have no easy answer for. And insofar as I can find an answer, it's about the participatory activities that those kinds of books and plays and music drove, and finding ways that we can make sort of collective and social human behaviors out of these digital ones. And I find that can be quite upsetting, and maybe touches a little on the issues of isolation and so forth.
If I may add, I completely agree with what Tim said about maybe the fear of replacing the tradition with something new. I think that's a wrong approach, or a fear that maybe doesn't need to be there, because the purpose is to enrich the art forms and sort of augment them and not to replace. But then I think also maybe what is like especially true with the classical art forms, it's somehow the aesthetic of these classical art forms could be seen as something like very contrary or opposite to the aesthetics of technology. And I think here, perhaps the aesthetic of technology isn't like the one that is very attractive to people who enjoy classical art forms. But then I think that often means that you haven't put enough sort of design into your experience. If like the technology feels like that's the it's too much on the surface, like it could be somewhere like sort of hidden in the experience. Like it, of course, like experiences in VR and yes, in virtual reality mostly, that requires a lot of tech, and to outside it looks like it's all about the tech. But I think the focus should always be on the content, and if you do the content really well and you package it well, you design it well, you make it an attractive experience, and it becomes about the content that still has its heart in the classical art forms and not like the value in the tech itself. So I think the content should always come before the technology and the medium, and that's the sort of right order to think about them.
So, I mean, we spoke about a few fears or maybe even lack of knowledge of where to begin, some aspects that might create a certain reluctance. And we also mentioned a few things that might be very important in order to overcome that. But again, the question then maybe, how could these barriers be overcome? How could we get people on board working in the sector and the audience? And what would help further the understanding of the potential of these immersive technologies and their use, in particular, in the live performance field?
I think first of all, you need to get your people, your organization in there to experience things, to benchmark, to see a lot of things. And I think also whatever you do, sort of make it sort of participative or participatory process within the organization, and to create those opportunities to learn also in the organization internally, so that you don't just do commissions from outside, but you also like sort of gain knowledge within the organization. I think that's really important.
That's true. And Franziska, please.
Yeah, just quickly, yes. I think we need to invest in the education of students, and to really, there are some study programs arising more into game design, for example, but this connection between theater, the arts and technology is really, we have to bring it back into the schools. I just can speak from my school, like from stage design departments, it takes a long time until those technologies come back into those maybe more traditional study programs, but it's really important that we make a lot of effort to bring that back. It's not only having a 1-week workshop, having it as a real subject. That is one point, and the other point is educational workshops, training in theaters. That's what, for Germany at least, the DTAG is doing, I guess in the other countries as well. This is something we really should focus on. And the third thing is, as we did today, speak about it, bring it to the audience, experiment, do more projects, and show it. It's I guess all of us need to do that. I mean, we are so focused in doing the project, but talking about it, showing it, having good material, document it and evaluate it. This is something we really should do in every project. And I was really happy to see how you did it in your projects, the user experience into questionnaires and so on. This is really important. We need more research about it. So I think on all those fields, we should put some effort in it.
Yeah, I think that's right. What Anastina said is these offerings of knowledge to other people who are interested. And then what Franziska and I saw in our project is when we came to the houses, it will never work if we pressure people into experiencing the new future realities or what could be happening. But it should always be there as an offering, standing on the side and with a smile. And if you're interested, just come by and talk to us or go to a workshop and do something. But it has to be a constant offering that should be there. And also, as Franziska said, it's extremely important to invest into the future. So one thing is working with the institutions right now But for example, what we do, or in my lab, I have the future realities lab, and we work a lot with this immersive technologies, always in the intersection with culture or knowledge transfer. So we always looking for partners from other institutions. It could be houses, it could also be other universities that work on these more traditional fields. And in this cooperation, because no one can do it by themselves, right? So if I see it from a design or communication design standpoint, and from a bit of a technology, I cannot do it alone. I need some partner, someone who I can cooperate with and start a dialogue. And because the interesting things always happen between the elements or between the disciplines. It's there where the music is at in the end, right? So yay for corporations.
I second that. If there are no more direct contributions to this question, there's a question from the chat that nicely links our first block now, and then the second part where we want to look a bit more at the technology. There was a question in the chat that I'm just going to read it. It's a general question to those who presented the VR projects in theatre and opera. So why is it that almost across the board, the graphics created looked some 20 years behind the current computer animated graphics standards? Having played a bit in VR with the Oculus Quest, I am more often than not disappointed by the graphics presented in the most cutting-edge immersive projects in the performing arts arena, such as those presented today. It's a question to whoever wants to reply to that.
I would take that, maybe. I think there's a lot of things coming together in a production like this, and we are still focusing on certain things to find out. We are exploring sound, we are exploring acoustics, and all these sorts of systems that we want to establish. And there's not really a big enough group to support every single angle. And then we are trying to create something with the best means that we have, and the size of the team and the budgets that we have. And I think all these explorations and all this research where we find things out will eventually enable bigger and better experiences, where you go in and you have very high quality visuals to it, which usually are consistent of a huge team. So if you're looking at a triple A gaming title, it's huge teams behind it. They have really established workflows behind it, and game engines that are built for it and to make it all immaculate. But we are all putting together experimental code and things to make this happen. So excuse us that it's not maybe the highest visual fidelity, but there's lots of things to consider. It's also true that there are a lot of traps in fidelity. I mean, I think one of the things since we're basically in theater of one sort of or another, that realism is an open question. Like, some people like abstraction. There's a history of realism that's several thousand years old, and it also is not solved. What it means to really experience a painting, and why would you make a picture of a piano instead of just playing one? And all these questions end up making all kinds of strange things. And if you make it very realistic, you can also fall into the trap of scaring people into thinking that they're being chased by zombies. So we have to be very, unless that's what you want. I mean, that's also maybe that's a good outcome. But we have to be very careful what we mean by reality and what we want to transmit. And I think in our case, we've thought that sound is what we want to transmit, and the role of location in sound. And I don't think we want to trick people into thinking that people are physically there. We want to get you thinking about how communication is made with sound.
Being chased by a flautist. It's a scary thought. Luke, maybe you.
No, I mean, I agree with all of that. I think, there's just some hard challenges of, even in VR, just technically rendering something in VR is very different to rendering it on a 2D screen. So, the best looking VR thing I've ever seen, which was, Alex Half-Life, I still think is probably the best game I've seen, probably cost millions. And so the blunt truth is stuff is just still really hard, and it's very expensive. And and actually the games industry just dwarves us generally. So I think that's going to be a challenge, but I think this stuff is moving really quickly, and I think again you can be very innovative. I've seen some fantastic work on very limited budgets, and these tools are becoming more and more available all the time. Just quickly to the point of education, I completely agree, and I think what's encouraging is that companies like Unreal they're going to start making the GarageBand version of a games engine. It's going to the next generation are just going to be used to building games much more quickly, much more easily. So I think that stuff will come quickly. There was a question about how we possibly activate the audience in the forest experience. So with Dream, we did a lot of audience research on that, and actually I'm very happy to follow up with there was a whole strand, and we worked with University of Goldsmiths, who really led on the audience development work, and we did a lot of analysis before and after, and we shared the report, so I can share that. But actually, for me creatively, the hard choice I had to make is what I'd really wanted to do is I wanted the audience to have that musical interactivity and musicality that you saw in Puck. But because of the pandemic, we basically gave the superpowers to the performers. So creatively, there was interactivity in the experience, but it wasn't really musical. So the participatory element wasn't really there musically for the audience, I would say, in that first experience, but it's something that I'm really interested in.
Thank you. Yeah, looking at the technology, I would like to ask Brian, given that the origins of some of the current digital technology go as far back as, let's say, the 20s or the 30s or the 60s, what is your take on how quickly technology will progress, and how quickly, we also mentioned this fact, how quickly will its implementation become more feasible, both in terms of application and also financial resources? And do you think there's any chance that the use of immersive technology will actually become a popular tool for enjoying, say, a classical concert or an opera performance? And I would also like to ask that Brian, but of course open it up to the group. Brian, you're muted. Sorry.
Oops, sorry. There's definitely a rapid evolution in technology, like immersive audio that we can see. So if we go back to our first performance in 2015, it was kind of first order ambisonic, not very precise. We were using an Oculus CV1. And in that sense, all the graphics was optimized to that. So low pixel resolution and low processing or tethered. And now you can do things on, a Quest 2, which is more mobile, but it's still limited in some processing. And that could also have kind of a response to the graphics that we see. Real-time rendered graphics is not the same as Pixar and things like that, or a desktop machine. But definitely the audio is progressing. Bandwidth is probably the thing that's progressing not as fast. So if you want high quality, multiple audio sources, really precise 3D audio, it's very hard to stream something from remotely. So you're either installing gigabytes and gigabytes of data on people's machines, or you're pre-rendering and losing the interactivity. But I think there's definitely evolutions in how that's going. So I think we're quite positive. We're running into less technical limitations now than experience by sound designers and engineers of thinking what is possible and we can actually do better. And that probably happens in a lot of things. But there is a lot of technical knowledge that needs to be shared, less than technical capabilities that need to be created. So I think there's quite a lot that's possible on the audio side. Graphics is also another kind of aspect, and motion tracking is another thing that adds a lot of complexity. I don't know if that answered the question now that I think about it.
I think so. I would like to pick up on something that Tim also mentioned earlier. It's the user experience. So maybe one could argue that digital technologies create a certain loneliness of experience. This can either apply to anechoic recordings, where musicians play on their own, which is a completely different experience to playing in an orchestra, or to visitors using 3D goggles, like in Future Presence or Spatial Encounters, or to cinema goers watching a movie with binaural headphones, which separates them from the person sitting next to them. Do we need to rethink togetherness and group experience in the future, and especially with regard to virtual, augmented, or mixed reality? What role do devices, does hardware play for this?
I think we need to think this technology first and foremost as a social component, and we are now having limitations, which is technological and network limitations, but this will evolve eventually to become a social experience, and you have full awareness of your friends or people standing next to you or sitting next to you, or being in a virtual space that you pull into an experience, and you have this essentially shared experience. This is also what we did for the Ives piece. It was 4 headsets, and you had awareness of each other, and you could see each other in form of a big eyeball, as you can see also in the PDF. And I think even a very basic shape and representation is already a lot in this kind of virtual experience. And this is only getting better, and so I think the social component is going to be a very strong one, and it's just a matter of time, and we're very close to that. That the technology is easy enough to use and to implement into these experiences. So that's not going to be far away.
And then maybe from a slightly different angle, I think that there is a way, I write about this a little bit, that there's a lot of things about digital media in general which expose the way that people are isolated from one another, and that we're sort of made of word clouds that describe us and sell us things, is quite strong. And there's a way that I think, there's something about looking at the VR which just puts that literally on your face, and you realize that you have been immersed more than you would have liked to admit. And I think it's important to confront that directly and say there are elements of this that are extremely isolating, but there are also elements of this which we can use to describe how connections are made. So I think there's a real issue there that has to do not just with VR but with digital things generally, in the way that it isolates and pinpoints the interiors of people.
Are there any other additions to this question? Any other replies?
Yeah, there are many research on this topic, I think, at the moment, and I'm really curious about the results and how we go in5 years in a VR concert, and with interactive, with my partner behind or in front of, and it's really a interesting aspect.
I guess we can also say that we concentrated on recreating reality in our experience a lot, and looking at spatial pieces like the Ives, for instance, but also the quartet, which is very dense and you can walk in it. And then I think the next step is going to explore what is actually not possible in reality, and then use it to its fullest extent. And this is a new language that we need to develop. And I think a good starting point is to recreate reality and then just take it from there and to put it onto the next level.
I think that's well said by Henrik. Like we need to look for the strength in VR, and not just like, and learn its language and its sort of where it works the best, and then use that to our advantage, and not like build for the medium itself, like not replicate something that we would do also in 2D video or something that we would do on the stage. There needs to be a reason why this piece is great in VR. And I think to come back to the question itself, I think there's great opportunity for like very, very intimate experiences, but then also and what has been a limitation so far, I think the social aspect of it is coming strongly. And I think those can be like super fun and really experiential pieces as well. I think there are like the two of them can work in VR and in different immersive mediums super well. But I think there's a lot more experiments to do to test and find its language and the best practices for the immersive mediums.
Yeah, thank you very much. Unfortunately, our time is up. I feel like there's a lot more, there's a lot more potential for debate in this group, also from the chat, but we have to finish at some point. So thank you very much for not only the keynotes, but also now for a very lively debate. Thank you to the speakers and to you in the audience. We touched upon a lot of important challenges, but even more opportunities that digital technologies could pose and offer to the live performing sectors. I think one crucial aspect we can definitely take from all of this is that there is a lot of determination and also a lot of ways of the cultural sector is engaging in and actively shaping the scope of action created by those technologies. And maybe even a call to action to not leave it entirely up to big tech to shape where we are going. There's a lot of that happening already, and it's been very exciting to have you share what you're doing with us. Thank you very much. From my side, I will now hand the virtual mic back to Christine.
Thank you, Janina. I hope you can hear me. It's okay. Yeah. Thank you very much also on behalf of the Aura Consortium. You did a wonderful job. I would not have dreamt that it could be so exciting. I'm glad we had this exchange. I always feel that, as you said at the beginning, education is one thing, but just knowing what's happening out there and what the others are doing, in particular, the pioneers are so open then to exchange later on their ideas. And this is, I think this is important to bring people like you together, and I'm glad we managed to do that. So thank you very much for your very spontaneous acceptance of the invitation. And of course, Nina, thank you very much for your moderation. We have recorded this. I also want to thank while I'm thanking the tech support and the European Commission for actually funding our project. So thank you very much. You will find the recording. Give us, I think, a couple of hours a day, perhaps, to place that on our website. The last slide will show you the link to our website, and then you can have a look there, and you will, of course, then see and revisit all the presentations shown. We can also give you the links to resources that have been shared here by the presenters, also on the website, so that you can find them back there. Thank you very, very much. It was super exciting, and I'm really glad this happened. Thank you for the audience that you were so multiple, and bye-bye. Have a nice day and a nice weekend. And of course, Merry Christmas.